The first thing I truly remember about that night was the sound of her voice. A raw, frightened tremor, struggling to rise above the steady, merciless drumming of the rain on the slick parking lot asphalt. Can you drive me home, please? She was an apparition beneath the stuttering, sickly yellow glow of the street lamp, her small silhouette framed by the downpour. She looked utterly abandoned, like a fragile structure whose foundation had just been obliterated. The immediate, rational response would have been an unconditional, instant affirmation. I should have said yes immediately, without hesitation. I should have taken the thick canvas jacket off my own weary shoulders and draped it around hers to ward off the chill. But exhaustion, fear, and 3 weeks of gnawing desperation had eroded my filter. Instead, the only thing that managed to escape my numb lips was the single, disastrous question that became the turning point for everything. So where do I sleep? If I had possessed even the slightest foresight into the maze that night would force us to navigate, the uncomfortable truths it would peel back, the dormant sorrow it would awaken, the hearts it might shatter, and subsequently, the lives it would meticulously piece back together, I might have found the strength to keep that pathetic question to myself. Or perhaps, knowing me, I wouldn't have. Because sometimes, the unplanned road, the detour you fight tooth and nail against, turns out to be the only path forward, the one place you discover you can no longer imagine surviving without. My road of self-inflicted misery had begun long before that chaotic, rainy evening, long before her voice broke into shards in the parking lot shadows. For 3 solid weeks, I had been living a carefully constructed lie out of the back seat of my beaten-up sedan, performing a strained pantomime of normalcy, as if I still had a routine, a paying job, a fixed address, a future waiting patiently for me. The termination notice from work had been followed swiftly by an eviction notice from the landlord. Every single person I had once counted as a friend had suddenly materialized an excuse. Too busy, traveling unexpectedly, or regrettably unable to extend a hand. So, my home became the dimly lit stretch of pavement behind the familiar neighborhood diner where I'd previously washed dishes. I kept my few belongings neatly stacked in milk crates, my jacket folded as a makeshift pillow, and repeated the same mantra every night. This is only temporary. The only thing that kept the heavy, suffocating darkness of those nights at bay was the golden, comforting light that hemorrhaged from the diner's grease-stained windows, and the faint, effervescent sound of her distinct laughter occasionally carried on the damp air. Her name was Emily. She wasn't merely the diner's late-shift waitress. She was the unacknowledged moral center of that whole place. She was the type of person who risked the manager's ire to slip an unauthorized free refill of coffee to a tired trucker. The kind of soul who genuinely remembered that Mrs. Henderson took her hash browns crispy and that Jake always ordered the lukewarm tea. Her simple, open smile possessed a strange, potent energy that briefly convinced you that no matter how long the bad times lasted, they couldn't possibly last forever. She knew nothing of the desperate geometry of my life, the meticulous way I folded myself into the back seat every night. She never suspected how many times I had nursed the cheapest menu item, a cup of black coffee or a single slice of burnt toast, just to purchase the hour of warmth and the faint illusion of being a functional human being again. She couldn't have known that on the nights when the weight of the world felt crushing, her routine, softly uttered phrase, "Have a good night, Jake," was more vital to my survival than the very air I was too tired to breathe. But tonight, the warm light held a sharp edge, and something was profoundly wrong. I saw the change the moment she stumbled out the back service door. She was clutching her soiled apron tightly against her chest, as if using the fabric to hold her own splintering pieces together. Her shoulders were hunched, the fine trembling visible even from the distance of my shadowed car. Her eyes were swollen and fiercely red. She didn't spot me sitting there, hidden by the deep shadows and the driving rain. She leaned heavily against the cold brick wall, burying her face in both hands, and let out a sound so small it was almost swallowed by the storm. A whispered plea that sounded like, "Please stop. Please not tonight." My own chest cavity tightened with immediate, painful alarm. My first instinct was to retreat, to avoid encroaching upon her private crisis, yet I couldn't simply remain a passive spectator while she was visibly disintegrating. So, I pushed the heavy car door open and stepped out slowly, carefully, as if she were a wild creature poised for flight, afraid that any sudden movement might make her vanish into the rain. "Emily," I called softly. Her head snapped up, the sudden shock in her eyes momentarily displacing the terror. For a heart-stopping second, that fear evaporated, replaced by a surge of raw, unexpected relief, which quickly morphed into deep confusion. "Jake, what are you doing here so late?" I hesitated. The truth. I live here lodged agonizingly in my throat. I defaulted to the most expedient lie. I merely shrugged, just about to leave. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously over her shoulder, checking the empty parking lot as if she expected a pursuer to materialize from the darkness. That's when the fragile control over her voice shattered. Can you drive me home, please?" Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She was unable to even manage the simple knot of her own apron strings. I closed the distance between us, gently unwrapping the damp fabric from her grasp. "Yeah," I said, the word solid and sure. "Of course." Then, because the universe delights in injecting cruel humor into moments of genuine crisis, the fatigue and the desperate need for security momentarily hijacked my mouth again. "So where do I sleep?" I hadn't meant for the wretched question to be audible. It was a casualty of exhaustion, an unconscious cry for shelter that slipped out before I could clamp down on it. The moment the words left my mouth, I was instantly flooded with searing regret. Emily's eyes widened, the fear replaced by sharp inquiry. "Jake, what do you mean?" I shook my head violently, forcing a strained, humorless laugh to dismiss it. "Nothing. Just a stupid joke." She didn't look remotely convinced, but thankfully, she didn't press the issue further. She simply scrambled into the passenger seat of my car, moving with the frantic haste of someone convinced that the terrifying night itself would physically consume her if she lingered outside for one more second. The drive to her house was silent, almost unnaturally quiet. She fidgeted constantly, twisting the cuff of her sleeve, her gaze fixed rigidly out the rain-streaked window. My protective instinct screamed at me to ask what had happened, to offer assurances that she didn't have to face the storm alone. But a deeper, intuitive voice warned me that sometimes, the safest thing you can offer another human being is respectful silence. We were barely halfway there when her confession came out in a dry, painful whisper. "My ex came tonight." The words hung in the charged air between us, chilling and sharp like a sudden frost. "He keeps showing up. He won't leave me alone." She took a ragged breath, pressing her palms together tightly. "Tonight." He grabbed my wrist. "Not hard, Jake. Just enough to let me know he could. Just enough to scare me. I didn't want to call the police, I needed to get away immediately." My knuckles turned white as my grip tightened reflexively around the steering wheel. "Emily," I said quietly, my voice laced with a fierce conviction I hadn't felt in weeks. "I won't let anything happen to you." Her breath hitched sharply, a small, choked sound that suggested she desperately wished to believe me but had long forgotten how. When I finally pulled the car up to the curb outside her small, dim, isolated house, she remained motionless. She simply sat, staring fixedly at her own front door as if it were the entryway to a dangerous trap. Finally, she spoke again, her voice barely a thread. "Jake, could you stay? Just for a little while? I don't want to be alone tonight." In that instant I understood. The embarrassing, selfish question I had accidentally uttered hours ago, "Where do I sleep?" was no longer solely about my need for shelter. It was about our shared need. We were two shipwrecked souls, desperately circling the same emotional storm, reaching out for any available anchor. The true beginning was her hesitantly opening her door and letting me into her life for the first time. The house inside was quiet, too quiet. Every surface was meticulously neat, yet the atmosphere was heavy with a pervasive, lingering sadness. There were framed photographs on a shelf uniformly turned face down. A soft, embroidered blanket was folded with unsettling perfection on the arm of the sofa. A single mug, freshly washed, sat drying on the counter, seeming to wait endlessly for a user who had departed long ago. She gestured weakly toward the living room sofa. "You can sit," she managed, her voice still laced with a residual tremor. I lowered myself slowly, careful in every movement, unwilling to make her feel crowded or threatened in her own refuge. She began pacing the small room, rubbing her arms vigorously as if warding off a deep internal cold. "He used to live here," she said finally, staring blankly at the wall. "He's been gone 8 months, but some nights it still feels like he never left." She stopped suddenly, turning those tired, glassy eyes upon me. "I'm so sorry I asked you to stay. You must have your own life, your own home you need to get back to." It was the moment of reckoning, the final, unavoidable truth. In one soft, heavy exhalation, I gave up the fight and confessed. "Emily, I've been sleeping in my car." She froze completely in the middle of the floor. "How long?" she whispered, the question barely audible. 3 weeks. Her eyes instantly filled with liquid, shimmering light, but it wasn't the easy moisture of pity. It was something profoundly deeper. A complex tangle of hurt, disbelief, shared guilt, and overwhelming compassion. She walked toward me with painful deliberation, each slow step seeming to carry the weight of everything she hadn't known, everything she had missed. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice cracking under the strain. I managed only a weak shrug. "I didn't want to be a burden." She sat down beside me on the sofa, close enough that I could feel the residual heat and the persistent vibration of her anxiety. "Jake," she whispered, her voice fierce and low, "you are not a burden." Those 3 simple words struck me with more force than any physical blow I had suffered in months. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, someone saw my pain and chose to stay anchored beside it. For the first time in a long time, someone genuinely cared enough to confront the ugly truth. She asked if I wanted something to eat. I hadn't consumed anything substantial since a cheap gas station pastry that morning, but the ingrained shame of charity made me instinctively lie. I told her I was fine. She ignored the denial completely, heating a humble bowl of soup and placing it gently in my trembling hands like an unspoken, solemn promise that I would not be forced to navigate the world hungry anymore. When I was finished, she took a deep, steadying breath and looked me in the eyes. "You can sleep right here tonight, on the couch. It's safe." But the subtle hesitation in her gaze, the tiny twitch in her hands, told me the deeper truth. She didn't want me too far away, either. The night settled into an uneasy quiet. She retreated to her bedroom, intentionally leaving the door ajar just a crack. I lay stiffly on the narrow couch, staring up at the dark, unfamiliar ceiling. Neither of us slept. We were 2 sentinels guarding a shared silence. Around 3 a.m., her voice drifted softly from the doorway. "Jake, are you awake?" "Yeah." She stepped into the living room, her face a heartbreaking composition of lingering fear and tentative hope. "Can I sit with you?" I nodded without speaking. She sat on the floor beside the couch, leaning her head against the worn cushion near my hip. "I don't know why I feel safer with you here," she whispered into the darkness. "But I do." I slowly lowered my hand, and she immediately reached for it, grasping it firmly. It felt like the first solid, undeniable thing either of us had touched in months. And in that profoundly quiet moment, something essential shifted between us. It wasn't romantic or desperate or rushed. It was purely, deeply human. It was 2 people, battered and bruised by separate life storms, finding profound stillness and shelter simply in the gravity of the other's presence. Morning arrived with exquisite slowness. The weak sunlight finally pierced the window, touching her face, and for the first time since the rain began, she looked genuinely peaceful, the tension having bled out of her features. She made coffee and managed to burn the toast slightly. I helped her wipe down the few dishes. For a few fragile minutes, it felt undeniably like a home, like 2 people who had always been meant to occupy the same simple space. When I finally moved to gather my keys, prepared to face the shame of returning to my car, she gently caught my wrist. It was the same physical gesture her ex had used, a grab, but this one was entirely different, imbued with concern rather than control. "Jake, Don't go back to your car. I hesitated, confusion warring with a sudden surge of terrifying hope. What do you mean? She took a deep, committed breath, locking her gaze onto mine. Stay here, just until you get back on your feet. You helped me feel safe last night. Please let me help you feel the same way now. My throat tightened painfully, thick with unshed emotion. Emily, why would you do that? She looked at me, a soft, trembling smile finally reaching her eyes. Because last night you saved me. And today I want to save you too. And just like that, two broken, uneven pieces fit together in a way neither of us had ever anticipated. Not perfectly, not instantly, but enough. Enough to begin the impossible, slow work of healing. And perhaps that was the quiet, undeniable truth that life had been trying to scream at us all along. Sometimes, the home you are relentlessly searching for is secretly hiding inside the person who needed you just as fiercely as you needed them.